We're building something we think is going to be transformative. Technology capable of streaming direct thought for people who, through injury or disease, have lost the capacity to move or speak.
We're diving deep into a bold new frontier at the intersections of brain-computer interfaces and consumer tech. Seriously. Joining me today is Kurt Haggstrom, Chief Commercial Officer at Synchron, the pioneer company behind the FDA-authorized Stentrode, a brain-computer interface that's redefining accessibility. With Apple now collaborating with Synchron, what does this mean for the future of human-device interactions? Why did Apple choose Synchron over competitors like Neuralink? And how close are we to everyday mind control tech? We'll explore the science, ethics, risks, and revolutionary potential of this partnership. From restoring communications for people with paralysis to the deeper implications for data privacy, policy, and the future of the human mind. Join us as we get rebelliously curious.
Kirk, thank you so much for joining me today. I am so interested in BCIs, brain-computer interfaces. Since I was a little kid, I remember watching the Discovery Channel, and one episode was about inventions that were going to change the future. And I remember it's ingrained like a tattoo in my brain, literally. And I remember one of them being, first one was GPS, and then it was like flat screen TVs, which we use so commonly now. But then another one was brain interface chips. And I remember my dad, this is like hilarious, but my dad looked at me one day and he was like, never get a chip in your brain. And I laughed because I was like, is this really the future? And we've seen this progression of technologies with chipping, but not to the extent that we're doing that is changing people's lives for the best. And I've been following this with the debrief, writing about it for a while now, and speaking about invasive and non-invasive procedures that are happening, with really the beginning of Neuralink and the company that you work for as well. So thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So let's start off. So the company's name is Synchron. It is a brain interface company, and you're developing these types of tools that will be going into the brain and helping people with different types of disabilities. Mainly ALS is one of them. Can we talk a little bit about the future of this land and what it's going to look like for accessibility, and then what it might look like for the average person that will be able to one day use this as a consumer-based brand, and where that might even go?
Yeah. So, I certainly appreciate you having me on, and it for BCI in itself. To your point of like, I remember learning about this, when you were younger, and in fact, it's been around for like 30 years.
Seriously.
And so the research in science has been amazing. Of what the foundation that's built of understanding how the brain works through sensors has been great. But the problem in the limitation has really been the approach on how to access the brain. And so requiring an open surgery or a craniotomy to access the brain and putting things either in the brain, sensors in the brain or on the brain. The unfortunate thing is the brain tissue doesn't always like it. And matter of fact, it's actually, if you just think about the most simplistic way, it's almost like a saltwater bath. The materials that you use have to basically withstand water, right? If you go in the brain. And so, and that's kind of plagued the BCI industry that has prevented them really from making this a product for people to use every day, for those that need it. And so this is where our founders, Dr. Tom Oxley, Raul Chalmer, and Nick Gopai, really thought of it like a very creative way to say, well, what if we took the blood vessels, just like cardiology, and transferred of open surgery to now taking the arteries to access the heart? Well, can we do the same thing with the brain? And luckily that there was a head start on this innovation and this minimally invasive approach accessing the brain via the blood vessels that has kind of spawned the company and said, well, now can we bring electronics to these blood vessels? And can we put electronics and attach them to a stent? And so that's what we've been able to do here at Synchron is create a way to access the brain in a very novel way and rethink how a stent, which is again been around for 30 years, right? Rethink how a stent can have function. And now we use it as a functioning as a sensor to listen to the brain and what it does, and then create applications, digital actions that come from that signal. And so when you think about where I see the future of this technology, we are laser focused. In our company right now, mission driven around creating a motor neural prosthetic. This is a medical device. This is a class 3 medical device. So it's the highest rigor of medical device that you have to work with the FDA and prove its safety and efficacy. We are very targeted. And as you mentioned, people that have impairment, especially specifically motor impairment, where now they've lost the connection to the digital world. If you would think about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, well, the digital world probably wasn't the everyday, everybody wasn't walking around with a smartphone. People weren't working remote, right? But this day and age, everything has now transferred to a digital realm. And so now individuals that can't access that or try to access it, whether it's a joystick in their mouth or stylet or trying to use a cursor with their eyes, like those are good, but it's like a life ring and you throw it and somebody's drowning, but they're still in the water. Where I think BCI, this type of prosthetic actually gets them out of the water and functioning again in a digital realm. And so I get excited because there's millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people out there that can't connect like you and I are in this digital world to say as simple as I love you to a loved one, to actually maybe even going back to work to support their family. And so we're in a time now where it's awesome because the tech world is moving and advancing really quickly, and we get to plug into that to again that restore independence and autonomy for those that need it. When you think about beyond this, to be honest with you, it's a horizon that it's tough to see. I'll be honest with you because what's in front of me are stories that I hear every single day about people, especially the degenerative diseases like ALS. These stories where it's urgency. I need it now. I can't speak to my 7 and 9-year-old anymore. I've lost all function. Or I can't, I lost my job. And I was the one that was, I got in an accident. I lost my job and now I can't support my family. These stories are walls in front of me. And so when you think about trying to look at a horizon where this technology goes off and it's, for people like you and I, and it creates more efficiency and a whole different way of interacting with computers. Yes. But I have stories in front of me like barriers that I need to knock down one by one with this technology that is going to hopefully be fulfilling and game changing for those that need it.
Oh, 100% it will be. I believe that. I think so many of us do. It's unbelievable to watch the development and write about it.
Yeah.
When I look at Neuralink and what they're doing as a competitor in the space, or even just someone who is, doing the same work, right? Maybe not always competitors, but we're doing the same work and have a similar goal of being able to change people's lives that are dealing with different forms of disability. When we look at Neuralink and they're using words now like telepathy and stuff like that, and they're coining them, what do you say from a branding perspective? And then we'll move in a little bit into Apple, but I find it interesting how Elon Musk has used that because telepathy has been a very buzzword within the edge science community recently. And we'll be seeing more documentaries about that. And there's been, I would say pseudoscience, but soft science around telepathy too. So how do you take that from a branding perspective and what Elon Musk is doing? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to comment too much on Elon, obviously. At the end of the day, competition's good. I love that you get more people that are invested in this area, focus on the same problem, solve the same problem for people that need it. Telepathy, I think that's great. That's obviously a word that's been around for like 1,000 years. I don't know how many years, right? So
for sure, yeah.
Certainly not bringing it new. And there is, like to your point, there's a lot of science that without the world of brain computer interfaces, that telepathy is like, hey, there's a whole science around that, right, and how it works. It's marketing. right? And so, but what I do appreciate is that the more companies that work on this, the more problems, the more innovations that spawn. It brings more capital into the industry. And in fact, we're all working somewhat together. So the FDA actually opened up a collaborative community around implantable brain computer interfaces. So all the companies, big companies that probably people know about or starting to know about, actually are all working from an industry standpoint, are all kind of at that table. And at the table is you have the FDA, you have CMS, you have advocacy, you have academics. Everybody's at that table, and as well as potential patients and people that have used the system before, BCIs before. Everybody's at that table with a focused mission on bringing these type of technologies safely, affordably, and certainly functional, for those that need it. And so it's been a great collaboration. So we're all working kind of in a non-competitive way in this collaborative community, which has been great so far.
Yeah, I've noticed that too with the challenges right now with the FDA and just a lot of turnover, obviously, that's been happening through the Trump administration. I've been writing about that myself, but it's been amazing to see that they're pushing through. And then we see hospitals, especially I know I live in Toronto, Canada myself, seeing we're having hospitals here. I think there's been hospitals in Dubai now recently that have taken on these types of missions, and they're all over the world looking at this and pushing through and trying to find collaborative efforts. I've noticed that. To the Apple conversation, how did this merger start together when you were looking at collaborating together, working in hand to help solve disability challenges? How did that start? Because I think it's the first time this has ever been done. Correct
Yeah.
me if I'm wrong, but it's unbelievable. When I saw the announcement yesterday, I was like, this is a game changer.
Yeah, one of the things that we've had a real pleasure to be able to work with Apple, and then really at the end of the day, them supporting us in our effort. And I think maybe what people don't understand sometimes, and to be honest with you, I didn't either, because most people think, oh, Apple's just about selling more iPhones, more iPhones. But the reality is they have an amazing mission, and they have an accessibility team just focused on making sure that people can live a fuller life. They can express themselves with all of their accessibility features that they have within their technology platform. And to be honest with you, it was like a breath of fresh air to like meet these individuals that like you're looking at and like we share the same thing, we share the same mission. And they basically from their perspective say, how can we help? How can we help support you? You're trying to use our technologies, but how can we help support you on your mission? And so this is where they took hold and said, well, we could create this unique BCI HID, and that allows now an interaction of patients to interact with our environment in a completely different new way. So it's not thinking as it's like a mouse or it's a keyboard, it's a BCI. And I think that opens up a whole different realm of being able to give individuals kind of more independence, more freedom, more autonomy, because it just, they think in the device, the Apple device will turn on. And so instead of having to set settings and do all these things, like, no, they have that native control, just like when you open up your iPods, and you're connected, right? So you have that same thing, is that your thought in the morning, now you're connected into the Apple system. So they supported us in this, and it was just amazing that they said, "Hey, look, there's no formal like partnership or anything like that." They just said, "Look, there's companies that are out there that are trying to do something amazing for patients. How can we help support that industry and support that?" And so it's like, it blew my mind as well that a big company like that would sit there in the spawning technology and say, "Hey, how can we help?" And we share a lot of the same, the advocacy groups that we work with are the same ones they work with. So it's a small circle of folks that are trying to improve lives, and it's really cool to see like their passion is as much as passionate about this as we are around the individuals that we're trying to serve. So they've been amazing so far in supporting kind of our mission. So it's really cool to see this. And again, absolute first in the world that this is happening.
Yeah, Steve Jobs would be so proud. I would imagine he would probably be loving this
Yeah.
right now, right? I could imagine he'd love this in so many ways.
Yeah.
When it comes to data, we're always collecting different types of data, right? Like we have the human sensor and then we have sensors outside of us. Who owns and collects this data? Is it owned then by Apple technically? Is it owned by the company? Who owns this data, and then how is it analyzed on your end?
Yeah, so I mean, it's like any company that collects data. So how many companies out there that are collecting data, and how do they own the data, right? So it's usually under the control, and you have to make sure, especially in digital health, right? Like whether it's med tech companies of the world, or at small med tech companies, or even iPhone companies. Like you have the data, right? You control the data, you own the data. It's coming from your systems, whether it's a key press and you're starting to log on key presses, or whether it's a neural signal, right? So it's upon the owner of that device and technology to make sure you manage the data appropriately. And when it comes to data like this, where it's anything patient facing, it's just like, HIPAA for hospitals, right? Hospitals own data, right? So hospitals need all that health information that is extremely private, right? For all the individuals that belong to that health system. And so the same thing with your neural data, right? It's the same type of barriers, or same, basically kind of a blockade, same encryption, same type of really, really top level constraints that you have to protect the data of the individuals that use it. So it's kind of no different than you think about, like, heart rate data if I wear my Fitbit or whatever. So it's a very similar way than that we put the same type of controls in place to make sure that the privacy of individuals is kept at the most highest levels.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? Protecting others, especially as technology advances.
Yeah.
Now, when I haven't seen any policy, and to be honest, I haven't really looked deep myself to see if there's any policy that's been written around this. We have this evolution of like social media and AI, and you would imagine that we would have learned. Hopefully, I think we are from when social media first started. We didn't have a lot of policy in place, and unfortunately, a lot of regulations didn't have that, and corporate companies or other companies can take advantage of that, and those things have changed now, right? And we're seeing the same thing with AI. We're seeing defense get involved, the Pentagon's getting involved, so that along with just in general, there being laws for this. Is there policy that's being written right now around BCIs, and what have you been hearing about it, or what have you been contributing to it?
Yeah, so we're obviously trying to stay ahead of certainly the ethical and the ethical concerns around brain computer interface, right? Because like you said, it's been around there for a long time. Even schizophrenia, right? People think they have chips in their brain and everything. So this element of privacy is really, really important. And then what do we do with the data? Who owns the data? Tom Oxley, our CEO, he's on the forefront. We make sure that we talk with the neuroethicists all the time. And I think even like the World Economic Forum, like there are big forums where they're starting to understand, how do we treat these neurotechnologies? A non-invasive, something that you just put on a sticker on your head, or is maybe different than these implantable technologies that get a little deeper and closer to your signals and thoughts. And so I think it's not going to be one policy for all. I think you're going to have to look at all these things across the board. But I think it is an evolving conversation, right? Even in that collaborative community, for instance, there's a whole work stream around this concept of ethics, right? Neuroethics, and how do we look at that? And then that could be something that, that produce different assets, whether it's papers and understanding or comments, that could be where policy looks and says, okay, what does the collective industry, what does the collective collaborative community think about this, these type of issues and these type of questions? So, I don't think it's quite there yet, but I think it's evolving, and I think it will continue to evolve, just like AI, right? Like how we think about AI today, and how it helps us, and where do we need to look, and how do we need to affect. Like it's sometimes weird to think about, like, the compute power of tomorrow. That's going to bring up a whole nother level of concern and policy that needs to be written around that. And so I think you'll see the same thing with this neurotech, is that what we understand today, let's make sure we're having a really open, transparent conversation around it, and then say, how do we put the necessary policy and ethics around this, and make sure we're on the forefront of that. And then 20 years from now, what does it look like then, right? Who are we serving then? And what are the concerns now that it's in people and more people are utilizing it? And so I think it's going to be an evolving story, but one certainly that we're having today, and we're trying to lead it, because again, what we don't want is it to stall or prevent those individuals, those stories from ending and not getting the independence and autonomy. So the people that we're trying to serve, we don't want to put uh, too many barriers in front of them, aside from that, which are already the highest rigor of medical devices, as I mentioned, from a regulating standpoint, the highest rigor of data privacy. Like those are already in front of us that we have to work with, and safety and all these things. To add another layer that we're not quite sure on yet, I don't think makes sense from a policy standpoint. But let's help shape that. Let's not put blinders on and say that that's not really critical and it's really important to think about. So I think we're at that stage, of things right now. It's forming. and understanding. I think people are coming to the table and bringing up these concerns, and I think all the right people are there, and we're obviously trying to lead with that from a an industry standpoint.
Amazing. I see different countries like China for sure have made announcements, and I've written about this as well. They want to be the leader in this. That could be like saber rattling in a way, in its own way. It could mean many things, but in context of we know that they're looking at, trying to create the forefront for this, right? And they do have an edge when it comes to specific types of technology, right? We're seeing quantum computing that China really has an edge on. And it's fascinating to see how fast they are moving within this space. When we look at various different countries like China, and we look at even just North America, how are we seeing collaboration, and then how are we not seeing it?
Yeah, yeah. I think the one thing is, I've spent my whole life, competing from an industry standpoint, like in this neurotech space, right? So we've competed against companies all over the world. I've competed against companies that in China developing the same technologies that are then there to serve like a global, a global audience, right? And so it's always going to be there. And I kind of go towards for the sake of innovation in the patients that need it, whether it's technology that's here in the U.S. or companies and competitiveness there, or it's geopolitical. So it's geography, like it's across the seas and oceans. I think it's going to be a good thing, and it only drives me even further to say, hey, if they think they're ahead, let's get ahead of them. So I think that's going to be good for the industry is to keep pushing, and you obviously see it, right? Like it's a very competitive with the geographies that are also competing in the same space, whether it's AI, whether it's automation or other areas, certainly BCI. Where I think there's collaboration, certainly, is that at the core fundamental of the science, what I've seen with the folks in BCI, like the science aspect of it, are actually quite collaborative on what they're discovering and exposing on what they discover. And so sometimes it's not always the how'd you get there, but like what's possible, right? And so just like whether it's space travel or whether it's in depth, going far deep into the oceans, or just whether it's science based around atoms, right? People are very exposing of what they've achieved and what they've done, and they like to share. And so it's just the same thing with this, the BCI and science around it, is that people are sharing, and they're sharing their research. They go everything from a poster to a publication. And so there are forums like the BCI Society is actually happening this year in Banff, Canada, where it's a global group of individuals that are all working in brain computer interface, whether from China, whether from Europe, whether folks in the U.S. are all looking at this and all sharing ideas and all sharing what they've achieved in the science around this. So it's pretty collaborative on the scientific front. Sometimes on how'd you achieve it, or what's the magic recipe, or how'd you get there. Those things can be somewhat proprietary sometimes, but the fundamental of like what's been achieved and what's possible is sometimes transparent. Sometimes it's good that the science has been exposed, and I think we want to kind of keep that collaborative element around the science and share that, because I think that again spawns ideas. Like any innovation, I'm an engineer by trade, so it's always about innovation, and sometimes you look at somebody else's innovation, you say, oh, okay, we could do that, we do a little bit better, or hey, that just gave me an idea, now I can steer over here. And so that's how the beauty of engineering and innovation that happens, that all coming together and getting ideas from each other and understanding what's possible, right? And say, hey, maybe I can go even further with that exploration. So I think that's happening at the core of it. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I didn't realize that there was a BCI society. So I'll be taking a look at that. And it's also in my home country. So, that's
Oh,
always, might have to ship myself out there if I can go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. When we're looking at like, again, like just in quickly to that and to China, and just to make a comment to it, we look at things that other countries have done, especially within the CRISPR perspective, right? Where they're becoming very advanced with their technology, or they start using it in different applications that maybe in North America standards we would not find ethical. So, I think worldly, there has to have those discussions and conversations with different countries and within the science communities to say, hey, if we make the wrong decision, we won't be, we have to remember what the future is going to look like for everybody else. And, do we really have to, does everybody get an upper hand, or do we work together on this?
yeah. I think you'll see, just much like AI, I believe that, you know, um, AI will be everywhere. Like as you look at the AI and the big AI models and generative AI and even quantum computing and quantum computers and stuff, I think that everyone will have their access. Everyone will have their big, large models and their data centers and these type of things. So I think in natural, it's gonna, because everybody's working on it, it will happen. And I think the same thing with BCIs, right? From that standpoint, is that countries will develop it. They'll have their own brain computer interfaces. They'll have to regulate it themselves. To that point, I mean, we obviously wanted to, we go under the FDA and we want to make sure that they're affordable. So we work with our CMS regulating bodies as well, and the payers as well, private payers. So we're going to have to bring everybody on that journey. And the same thing's going to happen in the different countries, right? Their health systems and their reimbursement in their health structures are going to have to kind of bring these things and elevate everyone at the same time with these type of technologies. And so it's tough to predict too far ahead. But like I said, even like the World Economic Forum, like there are conversations being had around these neurotechnologies and the ethics around it. And so I think right now, I think everybody wants for the good of these things, and they do see the people that need it. And there's a huge burden, even on the economic burden that caring for these individuals have, right? So if you can get somebody back to work, imagine that how that flips the script on economic value for a technology like this. So it's huge.
It's huge. Yeah. And hoping that everybody plays fair in the space. My last question to you is, when looking kind of like the day-to-day of this mechanics, or even just the implementing it into the body, how long is that process, and what does that process look like for the individual that's experiencing it?
Yeah, this is where I'm a biomedical engineer by trade, and so I spent my whole career in this endovascular medicine, in this minimally invasive, taking the blood vessels as highways to treat and to create therapy, to deliver therapeutics. And so for me, that's the easiest part of what we're doing. Some people may say like, oh, that's the scariest part, but like for me, it's the easiest part. I'm the most comfortable in that part of our business. And so, this is like, you go to a cath lab, that you get like a stenting procedure, a minimally invasive procedure where they, it's a small incision, those type of things where you take the highway. So it's not in an operating room. Skull's not being removed or cut open. You're not going into the brain itself. You literally, just like a diagnostics that you get in a cath lab, you go through the blood vessels, minimally invasive, the catheters, you get the stentrode placed, you get the transceiver placed. And then you go home, and a couple weeks later, so it's you go home after that. Yeah, a couple weeks later, we come, once everything's healed, we come and we work with you to activate the device, and then you start up and running and using the device at home. So it's not in a clinic. You don't have to go anywhere. We come to you, and the device gets activated, and you're then up and running, starting using your BCI.
That's unbelievable. I can't even imagine. And I guess maybe this is my last question, but the reactions of the people that are experiencing this, that have never been able to have that type of like movement in their life, really, it is right through their mind, maybe not fully through their body yet, but through their mind, and being able to do so many things that they couldn't do before. It must be unbelievable to witness that.
Yeah, for me, if anybody in the employees or teammates, and we call them teammates in the company, is ever not motivated, just go see one of our patients, and you go sit there and work with them, and they just see the eyes, and you see, unfortunately, some of them, they're burdened by disease, so that disease progresses over time. So we see that burden, and so you see where a BCI, like, okay, this sustains a level of function for them, and I think that's where those stories, I think, will come more and more, and that voice, whether they have it or not, that voice will become more and more apparent as more people get these technologies that ultimately, I think, will also help shape policy and also help shape, payers, and understand like this changed their lives. They wouldn't be able to communicate, or they maybe even in some instances wouldn't want to live because they can't think about not being able to express themselves. Right. And so it's really fulfilling when we see and work with our patients. So, and they're that's like
Imagine.
pioneer heroes. So it's amazing to work with them.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And thank you for taking the time to chat with me
Yeah.
today.
Great meeting you. Thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate
Thank
your
you.
the field, and your passion is the same as mine. So it's that's awesome to see.